Hello, and welcome to our last lecture of our prehistoric art series, where we will be making our way to Saudi Arabia. So let's discuss our anthropomorphic style. Let's begin with the title. It's a new art history term. So anthropomorphic, in general, this means it has some human characteristics. As you can see, this artwork is extremely minimalist. It's stylized. There are abstract elements, geometric elements, where it's not a realistic depiction of a human figure, but we recognize the human elements in it. So it's anthropomorphic. Stele is consider it almost like a rock post. We will see this several other times throughout this semester. Okay, so this was dug up in northern Saudi Arabia. Our location is pretty near, think to like the Jordan-Syria border, and this is a region that was a very heavily trafficked area in terms of trade. If you're at all familiar with perhaps the Old Testament of the Bible or the Torah or the Quran, and you've heard the terms frankincense and myrrh, which were very valuable products during this time period, or during a significant portion of history, this area was found near there. In fact, there's an argument that the last king of Babylon moved to this area of Saudi Arabia and resided here. Anyway, so we know that there's trade. We know that there is some wealth, at least close to here. So that's what we know. Let's continue analyzing this object. So the image is treasured also because it has survived one of the many iconoclastic periods of time. Many religions, Christianity, Islam, have gone through periods of destroying images, especially of human figures. So the fact that this object has survived through these periods is quite special. Makes it more valuable because not many have. So let's look at the artwork itself. We have, like I said, some very geometric elements here. If we were going to analyze the formal elements, we would analyze a line, definitely. We have elements of a face with these two circles, this vertical shape that we recognize as a nose. There's a slight indentation for a mouth, the face, perhaps the neck or a necklace, some elements there. We also have a belt that seems decorative. And if you'll notice across this person's chest, we seem to have this double-bladed dagger. At least that's what many art historians argue. And so again, this helps to communicate what we discussed of the wealth of this area of trade. And that if you have any type of wealth or you have a precious resource, that you are going to protect it. Think to Chateauhook, how the whole city plans were built up in a defense or for defense of their obsidian. And so here we have this double-bladed dagger, which could indicate the wealth of this area or for whatever this purpose was. But in other words, there's something to defend here. Okay. Now let's head on over to China, and we're going to analyze our jade sung. So it looks like it would be pronounced Kong, but it's pronounced sung. Now, we have found many of these within graves. This is one of many grave goods. See how some are much longer. It looks like multiple sungs are stacked upon one another. We have different variations of jade. We most often think of jade as a green material, though occasionally it's a variation of different colors, such as this more white-looking one. We don't know their purpose. There are some theories that because the center is hollowed out, as you can see the top here, that perhaps it originated as some type of bracelet and then expanded in its meaning. We're not sure. We do know they were precious because they were buried in these graves. Some are more decorative than others. Some graves are found with more, likely indicating their wealth. Otherwise, we're not sure of their purpose. Now, jade is also a valuable material. It's valued today. We see it in other parts of the world, such as in Mesoamerica, where it's valuable. It's also extremely difficult to carve. And there's some theories about how this was carved. They didn't have quite the same materials. You couldn't just hack at it with a chisel or a saw, not necessarily even a drill at this time period. And so the most evidence goes to the theory that this was created by rubbing sand against the jade. and that through this craftsmanship, these highly skilled craftsmen or artisans, that they were able to create these images. And the one that we're analyzing right here is much more detailed than perhaps some other ones that have just some more decorative elements, whereas several like this one appear to have these face-like motifs. As you can see, these eyes and nose and mouth, arguably, we're not sure. They're also extremely symmetrical. And I want to introduce a new art history term using this artwork, the concept of relief. So we studied a sculpture in the round, Venus of Willendorf, where you could walk fully around it, look at all sides. And later on, we're going to study some other artworks that protrude from the wall. These sculptures protrude from the wall. So there's a difference between high relief and low relief. So that concept of relief is where it is carved out from the wall, where you're not walking fully in the round, such as our Venus of Willendorf. So if we look at our great altar of Zeus and Athena at Pergamon, which we will study in our ancient Greek unit, this is considered high relief. High means where it protrudes very far away from the background, from the wall, where if you look at our figures, I could almost wrap my hand around her torso or her arms or his arms, his torso, etc., that it protrudes so far from the wall. It is high relief. Versus our low relief, often called bas relief, the S is silent, where this is much lower. It barely protrudes from the background. And so here we have our low relief. Your Camelid Sacrum notes will come from the assigned resource. You were assigned a Smart History article before the lecture series began at the beginning of this unit, so you can refer to your notes from that. Let's talk about our Teotihuacan female figurine. And you'll notice in orange there is this word called duality, one of the theories behind this artwork. So we have many of these objects which have been found in Mexico. Central Mexico, the site of Teotihuacan, hence the name. They're ceramics, that's this baked clay. It's from the late 2nd millennium, and usually they're women, indicated by the larger hips and the breasts, though occasionally we have males. Some of them appear to be maybe wearing masks, such as on the right. They're in complex shapes. Some are carrying musical instruments. We're not really sure. But they were often found buried with the dead under the floors or houses. We're not sure if it's just for burial purposes or if they were disposed of. But either way, we found quite a few. Hundreds, in fact. Each one is unique with different hairstyles, clothing, body ornaments. There's theories of whether these are deities, whether they're based off of real people. Remember, our tendency is to often go with the religious route with unknown meaning in ancient artworks. I had one student one year ask, well, what if these are just toys? They remind me of toy figurines. That very well could be the case. There have been several artworks where they've been discovered or someone pointed out where it could be, for example, these little figurines that I pulled an image of, but I'm just thinking about it right now, where archaeologists couldn't figure out what it was. And then someone pointed out that it looked just like a baby bottle, and they figured out that they were just decorative little baby bottles. So we never know. But either way, there are many of these. So the one that we're going to study is this one. And what's unique about it? Well, it appears to have two faces. However, it doesn't have two separate sets of eyes. Instead, the central eye seems to be connected between the two. So here's where we come up with that concept of duality, that orange word that I had highlighted on the first page, of where we're not sure about the meaning of this, but if we're going with the spiritual route, is there's the idea of, we see, let me back up. In the Western world, we often see time as linear. There's a beginning, there's an end, or there's a beginning and then on to infinity in this linear form. Many cultures across the globe see time as cyclical, where it just continues and evolves. Think of like history repeats itself, just in different manners or different ways. under different circumstances. And so there's this idea of duality where with the comparison of polarities of we often see good and evil on being opposite ends of the spectrum, again with this linear idea, whereas much of the world sees it as more of a cyclical idea and that good and bad are happening at the same time. Or I like to just to better understand this is the saying that to really smile, you have to have shed some tears. For you to appreciate moments, you had to have had difficult moments. And that the two are one and the same, in that moments may be difficult because you've felt such happiness. You're able to experience and appreciate such happiness because of these difficult experiences. That the two complement each other, that they aren't on opposite ends of the spectrum, that in a way they're simultaneous. And so that's our concept of duality. We're going to go more in depth with this with a Shiva Nataraj image that we'll study later. But some argue those ideas in which we find in this region in Mesoamerica later on are seen in this artwork, and that the two different faces, yet still connected, remind us of this idea of duality. The position of that central eye is often associated with what's called the spiritual eye, the third eye, that some cultures believe connects them to the spiritual world. So there's another argument for that, though we're not really sure. These are all just speculative, and arguably we're putting later notions onto ancient artworks, which may have nothing to do with them. Either way, we can see the craftsmanship in this. We have different forms of creation. We have these incised lines in the hair. We have some elements of paint. We have the different details that are emphasized versus the lack of details, such as the lack of arms and fingers and feet. Those weren't broken off. They just originally weren't there. So we don't know what the images were for. Some argue that, and again, I don't necessarily agree with this, but some argue that some of these images may indicate some type of medical study in which they were studying certain deformities. But again, I think that that's a long shot, but you'll see that pop up if you ever Google this image. For the most part, we're going to focus on this concept of duality, which helps to introduce later artworks that we'll study. Okay, heading over to Papua New Guinea and our terracotta fragment. So again, this is this baked clay. It hardens once it's fired. It's lasted the test of time. And this is from the Lapita people. These are ancestors of modern-day Polynesians, including the Maori of New Zealand. And it indicates the complex cultural style that is still used today. If you ever go to New Zealand, and you'll see many of the Maori people with these very detailed tattoos, we see some elements here from so long ago. Even late 1700s explorers saw these. And so these tattoos are incredibly similar to some of the details that we found on these terracotta fragments. This area is really known for their ceramics. It was an advanced civilization. We have movement, we have domestication. They also transported plants and domesticated pigs and dogs to other regions. And so, and they were best known for their ceramics and these repeating geometric patterns. Occasionally, they'll include anthropomorphic faces and figures. You could argue that with the shape in the upper right, that it mimics the shape of a face. Either way, we don't know much about these steles, but it's interesting that these styles mimic the styles that are still used today. And wrapping it up with Stonehenge. So this was made about 1,000 years after the Great Pyramids. We don't have a written language that's been found. So here's what I mean. By the time the pyramids come about, we have an incredibly established written language. And so it develops in different areas and different regions at different times. We don't know the meaning of Stonehenge. It's incredibly speculative even to this day. It's probably one of the most famous ceremonial architecture in the world. Note that I purposefully use the word ceremonial because it wasn't used for settlements. We have no archaeological evidence of anyone settling near Stonehenge. Now, hinge, the word hinge, refers to a prehistoric artwork that's usually these circular megaliths, these large stones, megalith, large stones. This is one of about 900 that have been found, if you consider even over the globe. So here's some earlier images, drawings. And as you can see, parts of it have been put together by humans. Now, it was actually built in several phases. We have indications of that it was initially a wooden structure, and then as it expanded and they brought over these extremely large stones weighing several tons, that it began to expand. It also, the structure goes beyond the circular megaliths that we're seeing here. We do have some indications of burials nearby. We're not sure what the purpose is, but of course you've likely heard of the astronomical significance, and that on the winter and summer solstice, the sun will line up with certain stones. It's a little bit off now because of, this is from 2500 to 1600 BCE. But unfortunately, nobody knows why Stonehenge was built. Some people think it was used for people to worship the sun or the moon. Because of the burials that we found, many of the bodies seem to have died from a disease. And so one of the arguments is that this was a place of healing, and so people would come here for healing. For some, it didn't work due to these, the indication of these burials. But either way, almost all agree that it was a multifunctional site, especially with the different stages in which it was built. Here's one of the examples of the alignment. Hinge, megalith. The sarsen stone, this is a form of sandstone found in England. It was transported hundreds of miles away. Some of the, weigh up to 35 tons. And they were brought to this area. There are many different theories. We're not really sure, though. But what I do want you to know for this artwork, basically what I want you to take away from this is the post and lintel. And so we're going to see this with our history of architecture, where the lintel is our vertical beam, the post is our horizontal. Oh, I totally mixed that up, didn't I? Sorry. The post is the vertical beam, and our lintel is our horizontal beam. So as you see in the picture, which I also have under resources for reference. And so this was a way to, as you can see with our lintel, carry these extremely heavy lintels that weighed several tons. And that wraps up our Neolithic era.